So, my name is Casey Burkholder, and Jennifer Thompson and I have recently edited a book with Routledge called Fieldnotes in Qualitative Education and Social Science Research: Approaches, Practices, and Ethical Considerations. Today, Jen and I are going to talk with Lori McKee and Wendy Crocker about their chapter, Fieldnotes as a Square Dance: What Can Be Learned Through a Metaphor. In their collaborative chapter, Wendy and Lori use the metaphor of a square dance to explore field notes across several studies, suggesting that field notes themselves are rich data sets.
So Wendy and Lori, could you each talk a little bit about how you make or take field notes?
Well, I would have to say that I'm probably, of the two of us, old school. I'm somebody that has to have a pencil and paper or a notebook, or lately more a camera, but then the ability to print and write over top of that, as opposed to somebody that travels with a tablet or another device that I can use to record field notes. I think that's very much an extension of my own positionality and who I am as a teacher and as a researcher. I like to write things down, and I find by writing them down, I kind of relax into the scenario and into the context, and I can get closer to really being able to capture what's happening as I'm viewing something or recording that. How about you, Lori?
So I tend to like to jot things down quickly. For example, when mapping a classroom, I like to write that down quickly, pencil and paper. But I would say that most often I like to use audio recording as a voice notes method of field notes, because I tend to be a little bit messy. And so just being able to record with voice, I can get a lot of ideas down in a quick way.
So, what does your chapter tell us about field notes?
Well, I think that our chapter tells us that field notes can be used and adapted in a variety of different ways to respond to the research context, the purpose of the study, and who the researchers are in particular. So in this way, when we play with the idea of a dance, we're talking about field notes as being both technical and aesthetic, and it helps us to think about these open uses of technology, or technology field notes, sorry.
And I guess,
Wendy?
yeah, I just want to piggyback on that. I'm glad you used the word playful, because when we first started talking about this, we were talking about dancing with shadows and what were the shadows. And as we worked through this, the idea of a dance never disappeared from our discussions. But then we started thinking about, all right, so what kind of a dance would that be? And in arriving at the idea of a square dance, it was because square dances aren't necessarily developmental, but they evolve with the expertise of the dancers. And therefore, when you start out, you're attending very closely to the caller. Similarly, when we began as students, what do the research methods textbooks tell us? And it's am I doing this right? And it's very instrumental. But as you become more comfortable as a researcher and you're easing into that positionality, much as once you become more astute as a dancer, you start to do little iterations and do some riffing off some standard calls. And that's, I think, what our notes represent throughout our chapter, is how each of us have taken and grown from the research text into the methods and the tools that we use now as field notes.
And the last question, what do you think researchers need to know about field notes?
To piggyback off that, again, off that idea of riffing, I was just in a meeting this morning with one of the PhD students that I have the privilege of advising. And it is the idea that it's okay to move away from what the textbook version tells you field notes are. And reflecting back on my own experience as a student and now as a researcher and an advisor to other students who are working with field notes, it's the idea that right doesn't mean it's in the box, like that it's page 76 of a certain textbook. And I recall never having seen field notes, never having seen the raw data of anybody's work as a doctoral student. And so I had this image of what I thought they looked like. And I think as researchers, we have to be more okay with sharing our raw data, sharing our collection methods, and not just speaking to them as, you know, the pat, I used field notes, I used interviews, I used focus groups, I did an observation, but really come underneath the covers, if you will, of, so what did that mean? What did that look like for you? And being okay with sharing raw data as part of the process of coming to terms with your positionalities and identities as researchers. How about you, Lori?
Well, I think as a qualitative researcher, something that the whole idea of qualitative research that resonates with me is this idea of allowing research to emerge and to grow in response to who the researcher is and to the question under study. And in that way, I think field notes are likewise emergent and responsive to the situation. And in that way, they really help the researcher be able to pivot and position themselves in relation to the context that they're working within, and so that they can respond to the questions under study.
Lori's thinking made me think of something else that I was considering in response to this question. And it goes back to where I think this textbook makes a really important contribution through the idea that when we're now adapting new methodologies and new approaches to conducting research, the same tools aren't always going to work. So we have to be open to looking at the ways in which we take field notes, the way we capture field notes, what we do with them in response to these different ways and these different emerging methodologies that are on the landscape. And you know, it's not the one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.